सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Over the last weekend, ISRO performed the first demo flight of its SSLV or Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, its latest rocket model. The SSLV will join the PSLV and GSLV and will add to ISRO's fleet of rockets that launch satellites to various orbits around Earth. This is ISRO's strength above all else on a global stage, the ability to consistently and reliably launch customer satellites to space. The outcome of the launch was not a complete success. The rocket performed as expected up until the last stage of operations and failed to insert its two payloads, two satellites, into their designated orbit. As a result, both satellites started experiencing orbital decay immediately and were unstable. They burned up over the atmosphere and likely fell somewhere in the Pacific Ocean close to Australia. This is extremely unfortunate for the two payloads, especially for the student satellite that was built by rural female school students across the country, but we'll come to that in a minute. For SSLV, the rocket itself was a success mechanically. There was no mechanical or structural error. What caused the mission to fail was a bug in the code. It was an algorithmic error in the computer programming behind the operations. These are the three big launch vehicles of ISRO that are currently either in use or being developed. The PSLV is the oldest and the most reliable launcher. Anytime I say PSLV, if you think of the word workhorse, it's because ISRO has exactly meant for that to happen. ISRO loves using the term workhorse. It's its favorite adjective for the PSLV, and the word sort of captures what the rocket really does for ISRO. For decades, the PSLV has been sending satellites from various countries and companies up into their orbits with only a handful of mission failures. It has a very high success rate. But if PSLV is so good and efficient already, why do we need the SSLV and GSLV? What's the difference between the three? And all this wide reporting about the 750 girl students who built one of the satellites, how exactly did that happen, and how did these kids learn to build satellites when most of them had never seen a computer before this project? The SSLV stands for and is a small satellite launch vehicle. ISRO's name scheme is very simple. The name of the rocket tells us exactly what kind of satellite it launches. Small Satellite Launch Vehicle is designed to launch up to 500 kilograms to a height of 500 kilometers. This will mainly launch smaller, low-cost satellites that have a quick turnaround time. Then there's the old and trusty hardy Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, the PSLV. This launches satellites to a polar orbit, meaning that these satellites fly almost over the Earth's poles. This orbit is also called a sun-synchronous orbit, meaning it is in sync with the sun, so it passes the same point on Earth at the same time every day. PSLV is a medium-lift vehicle and can launch up to 3,800 kilos in its XL configuration up to 200 kilometers above the surface. It can also launch 1,300 kilos up to elliptical orbits of 42,000 kilometers above sea level. That's how it was able to launch Mangalyaan to a high enough orbit for it to climb out into space. The Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, or the relatively newer GSLV, is a heavy lift vehicle that can carry the heaviest payloads to the highest orbits. It can carry up to 5,000 kilos to orbits of 2,000 kilometers, and it can carry 2,500 kilos to elliptical orbits of 42,000 kilometers. The new SSLV, when it's operational in a year or so's time, if things go well, will start flying later on from a separate new launch pad that is being built by ISRO right there in the Sriharikota complex. During this demo flight, though, the SSLV rocket did not succeed in placing its payloads into their designated orbits. One payload was a demonstrator Earth observation satellite, EOS-02. The other was the student satellite called Azadi Sat. The rocket flew well. However, there was a sensor failure that the algorithm did not detect. If it had, there should have been a salvage algorithm that would have kicked in. But because it did not, the last stage or part of the rocket, called the Velocity Trimming Module or VTM, did not burn for 20 seconds as intended. Instead, it burned for only 0.1 second, and thus the rocket was not able to acquire its desired altitude. ISRO also said that they suffered data loss at this point. The SSLV placed the payloads into an elliptical orbit that was 356 kilometers by 76 kilometers, which means that the closest point to Earth was 76 and the farthest was 356 kilometers. Instead, the two satellites should have been put into a circular orbit of 356 kilometers. So the mission was not ultimately successful, although the rocket seems to have performed as desired mechanically. So the physical structure and construction and integration of the rocket seems to be good. The coding needs some improvement. This will be tested out in the next demo flight that is scheduled for later this year. The satellites could not stay in the unstable orbit and they started burning up over the atmosphere soon after. But interestingly, in this particular launch, it wasn't just the satellites that burnt. In the launch video for this mission, you can actually see a poor bird becoming barbecued just as the rocket takes off. On the other side of the world, NASA has measures to prevent incidents like this. Kennedy Space Center in Florida is near the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, so there's a ton of wildlife nearby where rockets are launched. NASA had a threat in 2005 when a vulture struck the Discovery space shuttle, and although it luckily did not cause any damage, everyone was rattled and they realized that there's potential for damage and also vice versa, potential to hurt birds during launches. So they used various measures to clear birds and other wildlife from the surrounding areas of a launch. Propane cannons are common and popular, they're widely used even in Europe, and they produce periodic loud bangs that scare wildlife away. This is similar to what happens before detonation of hillsides or during mining as well, to scare the animals and birds away. Roadkill or any form of waste that could attract birds is also cleared away regularly around the launch area. And there is radar monitoring to watch out for birds before liftoff as well as warning sirens. ISRO's Sriharikota, or SHAR as it's commonly known, is located on an island too, in an ecologically sensitive zone, and it is accessible from Chennai. To get there, you have to cross the Pulicat Lake, a large brackish water lagoon. Brackish water essentially is less salty than seawater, but more salty than fresh water. This lake is an important wetland and has the Pulicat Lake Bird Sanctuary. Sriharikota acts as the barrier island which separates this brackish water from the Bay of Bengal. There are a myriad of birds here, including flamingos, and of course these birds do not come near the rockets, but ISRO still hasn't figured out a way for some kind of wildlife alarm before launches. It's been widely reported that 750 girl students were involved in building the Azadi Sat payload, but what does that mean? How can 750 students from across the country build one satellite? Well, here's how that happened. The effort was organized by Space Kids India, an astronomy-focused organization that helps students become interested in space and astronomy and build satellites. For India's 75th year of independence, the team wanted to have 750 female students be involved in making a payload for ISRO to launch, and it was an effort to encourage more women into STEM and STEAM fields. So the team at Space Kids India built PCB boards and got in touch with over 350 government schools across the country by calling them one by one. These are rural schools, and the team managed to reach schools in every state except Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram, where they could not reach anyone at all. Finally, they narrowed down 75 schools, rather 75 branches of a total of 68 schools, and formed teams of 10 female students each. These were all rural government schools. The effort was spearheaded by Dr. Srimati Keshan, and there was also a team from a Chennai-based juvenile home. Then the organization mailed these boards to each of the teams and then also funded some computers for some schools and taught the teams how to code using Python and Intel 8085 over Zoom. Remember, many of these kids had never touched a computer before. But over several months, they actually learned how to do this, and the students wrote the code for all of these boards themselves, testing them and being overjoyed by the results they were seeing. The team at Space Kids India then collected all the boards and integrated them with the satellite at their own center. Azadi Sat was a CubeSat, and it was an 8U CubeSat, meaning it had 8 cubes. Within that, these students helped build 75 individual smaller payloads in the satellite. These were payloads like transponders for amateur radio, a radiation counter, a magnetometer, a gyroscope, and a host of basic experimental science instruments. But it also carried a selfie camera, a plaque with 35,000 children's names, 108 art pieces about India made by children aged 8 to 12, a recording of Rabindranath Tagore's original rendition of the Indian national anthem, and a space-themed original Hindi song that the team had come up with by themselves. Over 460 of these female students ultimately turned up to Chennai for the launch, and unfortunately, no doubt would have been extremely disappointed. These girls had just learned what the satellites were and had started building one, but could not get to see it go to space. However, the organization Space Kids India hopes to do this again, and ISRO is historically very accepting of student satellites built in India. And the fact that this is an SSLV offers even more hope. All in all, in the development and launch of SSLV, ISRO will now have a whole new ecosystem in India of small and experiment satellite launches, and it will have yet another flexible vehicle to add to its fleet of rockets.